Ladies and gentlemen, there's a moment, often silent, often unseen, that defines the deepest kind of human connection. It's not about what's said, or even what's done. It's about what's felt. And nowhere is that more true than in the space between two people who trust, who see, and who understand each other not just through words, but through presence. Today, we're going to talk about something that sits at the intersection of neuroscience, psychology, and human intimacy. A subject that's both misunderstood and deeply transformative than the 5 intimate secrets women wish men understood about pleasure and connection. Now, before we begin, I want to be clear. This isn't a conversation about performance, or technique, or comparison. It's a conversation about understanding. Because when science meets empathy, something extraordinary happens. Love becomes not just an emotion, but a neurological event. Intimacy becomes not just physical, but a dialogue between two nervous systems that have learned to trust each other. I once met a woman named Claire. She was in her late 50s, intelligent, successful, and deeply reflective. Yet when she came into my office, she said something I've heard far too often: I feel invisible in my own relationship. My husband loves me, but it's like he doesn't really see me anymore. What she described wasn't the absence of affection, it was the absence of attunement. Neuroscience has a term for this interpersonal resonance: the ability of two people's brains to synchronize during emotional or physical connection. When that resonance fades, even the most loving couples can begin to feel like strangers. So let's begin with the first secret, one that reshapes everything we know about intimacy. Women don't want to be impressed, they want to be understood. You see, the female brain is extraordinarily responsive to emotional context. When a woman feels emotionally safe, her body's oxytocin levels rise, her cortisol levels fall, and the limbic system, the emotional core of the brain, becomes more open to pleasure. In other words, for many women, safety is arousal. The science behind that is powerful. Oxytocin, sometimes called the bonding hormone, doesn't just deepen emotional connection, it literally alters the body's sensitivity to touch, increasing pleasure signals sent to the brain's sensory centers. So when a man listens, really listens, when he takes the time to understand rather than to fix, he's not just being kind. He's triggering biological pathways that amplify connection. It's not poetry, it's biochemistry. I remember another patient, a young couple in their 30s, married for 7 years. They came to me frustrated. "We're doing everything right," the husband said, "but something's missing." When I asked his wife what she needed, she said softly, "I need him to be with me, not just do things to me." It's a sentence that stopped him in his tracks, because what she was really asking for was presence. The second secret, the power of mindful intimacy. We live in a distracted age. Our minds are fragmented, constantly pulled in a dozen directions. But in intimacy, distraction is distance. The human brain knows when someone's attention is elsewhere. Functional MRI scans show that when we feel truly seen, when eye contact and emotional engagement are synchronized, the brain releases dopamine and endorphins, the same chemicals associated with joy and reward. That's why intimacy isn't about perfection, it's about presence. To be fully there, to breathe in sync, to move in rhythm, to notice subtle shifts. That's what makes connection transformative. In one study at the University of California, researchers observed that couples who practiced mindful touch for just 10 minutes a day showed not only higher relationship satisfaction, but measurable changes in brainwave coherence, meaning their neural activity literally began to align. That's the magic of mindful connection. Two nervous systems dancing in unison. The third secret is one that surprises many men for women. Emotional intimacy often precedes physical intimacy, not the other way around. It's not about sequence, it's about readiness. When a woman's emotional needs are met, when she feels valued, respected, and safe, her brain releases a cascade of neurotransmitters that prepare the body for arousal. It's the same system that evolved to ensure reproduction only occurred in moments of trust and security. So when partners rush through emotional foreplay, the laughter, the conversation, the curiosity, they skip over the neurological doorway to deeper connection. There's a story I'll never forget about a couple in their 70s, married for nearly 50 years. They came to one of my workshops not because they had problems, but because, as the husband said, "We want to fall in love again, on purpose." They sat together, holding hands, and I asked them to describe one moment from their relationship that felt sacred. She smiled and said, "Every morning, he makes me coffee and asks how I slept. It's small, but it means everything." That, my friends, is not small. That's neurochemical communication. That's safety encoded in routine. We often underestimate how simple gestures, a touch on the arm, a glance of recognition, activate the same oxytocin pathways as physical intimacy. Emotional connection is not a warm-up to love, it is love in motion. The fourth secret goes even deeper into the brain's design. It's this: women crave attunement, not assumption. Most men are problem solvers by nature. When something feels off, their instinct is to fix it. But intimacy isn't an equation to be solved, it's an emotion to be understood. The human mirror neuron system, the part of the brain that allows us to sense another person's feelings, plays a vital role here. When you pause to read your partner's face, tone, and energy, those neurons fire, synchronizing emotional states. Women who feel emotionally mirrored show higher levels of dopamine and oxytocin, the twin hormones of pleasure and bonding. In other words, empathy itself is arousing. Now, that's a radical idea. We think of arousal as physical, but it's also profoundly neurological. The brain's pleasure pathways don't just light up through stimulation. They light up through recognition. One woman in my research study put it beautifully. She said, "I don't need a man who knows what to do. I need a man who knows how to see me." And that brings us to the fifth and final secret. The one that transforms good relationships into lasting love. True intimacy is not found in performance, but in partnership. In long-term relationships, passion often fades not because of familiarity, but because curiosity dies. The most fulfilling intimacy comes from ongoing discovery. A willingness to explore your partner's evolving mind, body, and emotions. The human brain is a dynamic organ. It changes with experience, age, and environment. Women's hormonal rhythms shift throughout life, altering their needs and desires. When a couple adapts to those changes together, not with judgment, but with curiosity, they build something far more powerful than chemistry. They build trust that grows stronger with time. And in that trust, love doesn't grow old. It grows wise. Ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about the evolution of intimacy, we must remember that the human brain is not designed for novelty alone. It's designed for meaning. Passion without meaning fades, but connection that's grounded in purpose grows. This is why couples who thrive for decades aren't necessarily the ones who keep reinventing physical attraction, but those who keep rediscovering emotional truth. In brain imaging studies of couples who've been happily married for 20 or 30 years, we find something extraordinary. The neural circuits that light up when they look at their partner are not the same ones active in early infatuation. The adrenaline-driven, dopamine-saturated circuits of new love. Instead, the areas that glow most brightly are associated with calm, gratitude, and attachment. The limbic system quiets down, while the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for empathy, reflection, and appreciation, takes the lead. That tells us something profound. Over time, love evolves from excitement into awareness. And awareness, when practiced with care, becomes the deepest form of passion. I remember working with a couple, both in their early 40s, who had fallen into a silent rhythm. Polite, functional, but hollow. They came to therapy expecting tools to bring back the spark. Instead, I asked them to do something deceptively simple. Spend 5 minutes each day looking into each other's eyes without speaking. The first time, they laughed awkwardly. By the third day, they were crying. By the end of the week, they said, "We remember each other again." What changed wasn't technique. It was attention. The act of truly seeing another person activates the brain's anterior cingulate cortex, the region tied to emotional empathy and social connection. When we sustain eye contact with kindness, the body releases oxytocin and serotonin, creating feelings of safety and belonging. This is not pseudoscience, it's neurobiology in action. In the same way, emotional honesty, saying what we feel rather than what we think we should feel, has a measurable impact on the body. The vagus nerve, which connects the brain to the heart and gut, regulates both emotion and physiological calm. When we speak truthfully and feel heard, vagal tone increases, lowering blood pressure, reducing inflammation, and improving mood. Love literally regulates the nervous system. And so, when we talk about intimacy that endures, we are not only talking about affection or attraction. We are talking about the daily rituals that keep two nervous systems synchronized. The laughter before sleep, the gentle check-ins after conflict, the warmth of gratitude whispered over morning coffee. These moments of micro-connection create long-term stability in the brain's attachment pathways. Let me tell you about Helen and Arjun, a couple in their late 60s who attended one of my Neuroscience of love seminars. They had survived illnesses, career shifts, and the chaos of raising 3 children. When I asked what kept their relationship alive, Arjun said, "We touch hands when we argue." He laughed, but there was wisdom in his humor. He explained, "It's hard to fight when you remember the person you love is right there." That small act of physical grounding interrupts the amygdala's threat response, the fight or flight signal, and sends a new message to the brain. This is safe. You are not enemies. Conflict, when softened by touch or eye contact, transforms from a battle of egos into a dialogue of care. Now, some people ask me, isn't love supposed to be spontaneous? Doesn't planning or practicing it make it mechanical? And I say, no, it makes it mindful. The spontaneous moments of passion we remember so vividly happen not by accident, but because trust has made the mind calm enough to surrender to them. The neuroscience of pleasure shows that when anxiety decreases, sensory sensitivity increases. In other words, when you feel emotionally secure, your brain's pleasure centers, the nucleus accumbens and orbitofrontal cortex, become more responsive to even gentle forms of connection. Safety amplifies sensation, fear dulls it. That's why kindness, patience, and humor are not just nice gestures. They are neurochemical catalysts. They prime the brain for joy. There's another layer, one that's rarely discussed, but vitally important. It's about self-connection. Before we can be fully present with another, we must learn to feel safe in our own bodies. Many people carry silent histories of stress, shame, or trauma that make closeness difficult. In such cases, intimacy can feel overwhelming, not because of the partner, but because the body associates closeness with risk. Healing begins when we replace performance with curiosity. When we ask, what helps me feel safe? What helps me feel seen? These questions guide the nervous system toward regulation. They also give our partners a map, not of what to do, but of how to be with us. When I work with couples, I often teach what I call the listening breath. One partner speaks for a minute, while the other breathes slowly and simply listens, resisting the urge to respond. That rhythm of breath synchronizes heart rates within 60 seconds. The body begins to mirror calmness. In that silence, empathy grows. The most remarkable thing about love is that it's learnable. The brain can rewire for connection at any age. We've seen widows in their 70s fall in love again and light up brain regions identical to those of 20-year-olds. We've seen marriages recover after years of resentment when both partners learn to regulate their nervous systems together. So when people say, "The spark is gone," I often respond, "No, the circuit just needs rewiring." The wiring of love depends on attention, gratitude, and touch. And when you think about it, that's the beauty of being human. We're built to grow, not just individually, but together. In the end, what women, and indeed all of us, wish for is not perfection, but participation. A partner who stays curious, who notices, who shows up. The magic of intimacy lies in the ordinary acts that say, "I'm still here." Ladies and gentlemen, as you leave this room tonight, I hope you remember this: the most powerful force in the world isn't attraction, it's attunement. It's the look that says, "I see you," the voice that says, "I understand," and the heart that whispers, "You are safe with me." Because when we create safety, we create space for joy. When we create space for joy, the body opens, the mind softens, and love, real, lasting, life-shaping love, finds its rhythm again. And that rhythm, once rediscovered, becomes the quiet music of a shared life, the song that keeps playing long after the world grows silent. Thank you.